There's a lesson here, and I'm not the one that's gonna figure it out.
Don't worry, Rick. That's why I'm here. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, where I'd like to personally congratulate Dan Harmon for finally getting to work on a 4th season of one of his shows. Woo! I mean, sure, 6 seasons in the movie didn't quite work out for you, but hey, things are looking a bit brighter when it comes to Rick and Morty, right?
100 years! Pushing it to the limit, Rick and Morty, pushing it to the
100 years, Rick and Morty! I mean, that's a big promise, Dan, but to be fair, so few shows on television right now combine such subtle humor with big brain concepts that only us with the highest of IQs can totally understand, so I can see it sticking around for a long time. And yes, by the way, I do have my Rick and Morty tattoo. And no, you cannot see it. It's for the ladies' eyes only. Thank you very much. So, season 4 just started, and Rick and Morty is back showing that it ain't pulling any punches. The season 4 premiere, Rick, Die, Repeat, is everything that we've come to love about the show. Hilarious.
What do you want?
Meta.
You ruined the season 4 premiere!
And most importantly, smart. This episode throws a lot at us, and I mean a lot. In this single episode, it does everything from showing us a universe full of fascist shrimp to holograms gaining corporeal forms to even referencing the anime classic of Akira.
Oh, real nice, Rick. Turning our son into an Akira?
Leave it to Jerry the normie to go and ruin anime for all of us. And because it does throw so much at us in this one episode, it's actually really easy to lose track of what this episode is really all about. Rick even calls it out for us in the episode, almost like it's a challenge.
There's a lesson here, and I'm not the one that's gonna figure it out.
So today I wanted to try something new, something that's a little bit more laid back with fewer edits, a bit more of a casual discussion. Not so much a theory as it is an analysis of what this episode was really all about. What was the season 4 premiere trying to tell us? Because once you look past all the body horror and skinny dipping, this is a shockingly upbeat episode of Rick and Morty. And the message, at least the message as I see it, is perhaps the most humanitarian one that this show has had to date. The entire plot of the episode seems to be based around 2 conflicting ideas that send Rick Sanchez and Morty Smith into diverging directions. It all starts when Rick takes Morty on a mission to fetch some death crystals, rocks that, when they're touched, give you a prophetic vision of your future, specifically the deathy part of your future.
Death crystals show you how you're gonna die. Your future stems from your present, which, if you're living right, keeps changing.
Rick, of course, only wants the crystals to sell to the highest bidder. He doesn't want to know his own destiny except when it helps him to avoid death in the immediate present.
I don't use them. People that spend their life avoiding death are already dead. They're also rich, and I like to spend my life with their money.
Rick's philosophy here boils down to one key phrase.
The truth is, anyone that knows how they're definitely gonna die is either boring as
HE double hockey sticks.
Morty, however, seems to disagree. Ignoring Rick's advice, he decides to keep a death crystal in his pocket. And by touching it, he sees the various futures laid out before him, including one that involves him dying of old age in the loving arms of Jessica, the girl he's had a crush on since episode 1. Morty decides that this is the death that he wants, and he decides to relentlessly pursue that death by taking whatever steps necessary that will cause him to have that fate. Using the crystal in his pocket as a compass, every move he makes and every word he says from that point forward is directed towards that end goal, which, as it turns out, leads him to crashing the space cruiser and killing Rick in the process, and then not taking the steps necessary to revive Rick.
hey, hey, ho, ho. Not cloning your grandpa has got to go.
Luckily for Rick, Operation Phoenix is still online in other parts of the multiverse.
What the
Heck.
I axed this protocol.
Oh, and for those of you who don't remember, Operation Phoenix was actually the protocol introduced in Season 2's episode Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, a sort of immortality project for Rick to be reborn into a clone body if his main body ever bites the big one. And yes, he did literally axe that program.
I guess it's back to the drawing board.
So he gave the program the axe, but Rick isn't the only Rick in the multiverse. So that didn't stop him from being reincarnated into clone bodies that other Ricks across that multiverse were cultivating in other dimensions. Rick and Morty spend the rest of the episode on their separate adventures. Morty relentlessly follows whatever the Death Crystal tells him will lead him to dying with Jessica, which includes a Meeseeks-filled rampage and skipping a skinny dip with with the girl of his dreams.
I'm assuming we maybe get together in our 40s?
Eventually, it all ends with him turning himself into a giant Akira-inspired goo monster in the desert as he waits for further instructions from the Death Crystal. Shout out to all the fans of classic 80s anime out there. Morty seems to be pretty soulless and not to be fully enjoying the present moment, but hey, you gotta secure that future with Jessica, right? Rick, meanwhile, is off living and dying in the present moment, visiting a fascist universe, a fascist shrimp universe, and a fascist teddy bear universe. The cuddliest of all fascism, before finally being reincarnated into a wasp body, which surprisingly turns out to be the chillest of all the different dimensions.
We eat our prey alive, and when we don't, we lay our eggs in their eyeballs so that our young can feast on their brains when they hatch. When you're born that big and
Doo-doo head.
the least you can do is have a little empathy.
Wasp Rick helps our Rick get back home, and together they take down Morty in the desert, freeing him from the self-imposed bondage of the Death Crystal. After defeating an AI hologram with a little help from Wasp Rick, they all head home to not contemplate the moral of today's story.
There's a lesson here, and I'm not the one that's gonna figure it out.
Okay, maybe they talk about it a little.
Guess I gotta learn how to live in the moment a little more. Oh boy, so you actually learned something today? I was living in the moment all day and it kept getting me killed. I think you have to think ahead and live in the moment.
Seems like a pretty straightforward moral, right? The constant dichotomy of live in the moment versus plan for the future. And the solution that they come to, shock of all shocks, is you need to do all things in moderation. You need a little bit of both. Or at least that's what it appears to be at first glance. But there's actually more to this philosophical debate than meets the eye. You see, that isn't the real message of this episode. Rick's philosophy of living in the moment actually sounds similar to the core teachings of Zen Buddhism. Now, I could stand here and describe it for you, but British author Tim Lott actually sums it up really well. Quote from him, "The emphasis on the present moment is perhaps Zen's most distinctive characteristic. In our Western relationship with time, in which we compulsively pick over the past in order to learn lessons from it and then project into a hypothetical future in which those lessons can be applied, the present moment has been compressed into a tiny sliver on the clock face between a vast past and an infinite future. Zen, more than anything else, is about reclaiming and expanding the present moment. It tries to have you understand that there is no purpose in getting anywhere if when you get there, all you do is think about getting to some other future moment. Life exists in the present or nowhere at all." And this seems pretty spot on when it comes to Morty, right? Morty is so obsessed with how he's gonna die in this episode that he doesn't care about how he's living. I mean, he's a teenage boy who wants to wind up with Jessica, yet he turns down an opportunity to spend more quality time with her and her friends where he'll get to know them all just a little bit better.
A bunch of us girls were gonna go skinny dipping later if you wanted to join.
Yeah, he would get to know them a little bit better. I am sure the conversations that they would have had would have been very meaningful. Anyway, he pursues some vague idea of this future happiness, but in doing so, he ignores the happiness that's sitting right in front of him, undressing itself and jumping into the nearest lake. In this way, he is the antithesis of Zen Buddhism's teachings, which is why Morty's first words with the Death Crystal are so ironic in this episode.
Why don't you do what I do and just go with the flow? Nice and zen, baby.
Sorry, Morty, you're not being zen at all. In fact, Morty's philosophy is probably closest to what's known as objectivism. The idea that there are certain ultimate objective truths and that those truths supersede all of our subjective experiences like perceptions, emotions, or imagination. For Morty, his objective truth in this episode is that dying with Jessica at an old age is the best possible way to end his life. And rather than trust his own feelings or instincts, Morty follows the Death Crystal, who serves as his objective and impartial guide to life.
Sorry, hologram Rick. I'm going with the crystal on this one.
To Morty, everything else in his world exists only to help him towards making that future a reality. He evaluates the moral rightness and wrongness of each action based on whether it's going to lead him closer to that end goal. So, allowing Rick to die and stay dead, well, it moves him closer to that ultimate goal, so it's okay. Same with attacking bullies, same with attacking the police. All of these are morally reprehensible things, but they become morally justified under Morty's new value system, which only cares about one thing, whether or not it'll benefit him and lead him to dying with Jessica. In his mind, the ends justify justify the means. The show concludes by saying this.
I think you have to think ahead and live in the moment.
It makes it sound like Rick and Morty's philosophies both have problems that run in opposite directions. But in truth, Rick and Morty are both wrong for the exact same reason. You see, both Rick and Morty fall victim to the same trap. And that trap is ethical egoism. It's not catchy in the slightest. Ethical egoism is a theory, a consequentialist theory, that the consequences for any individual are the thing that matter the most when evaluating the morality of that individual's choices. Now, that sounds really complex and confusing, and it is when it's phrased that way, but it's really not that hard to understand, so let me simplify it. In short, egoism is all about taking actions that benefit you, even if they might be hurtful to others. So Rick taking Morty on deadly adventures, example of egoism. Morty vaporizing bullies because he wants to get with Jessica, egoism. If that sounds like an inherently selfish and potentially dangerous philosophy with which to look at the world, well, you're not wrong. But it is founded on a reasonable core principle, right? The fact that each individual person is the best expert on how to make themselves happy. By allowing everyone to be free to pursue whatever makes them happy in life, well, everyone will just take care of their own happiness and society will be all the better for it. That's the idea, but I think you can probably see a couple problems with it, right? If you're only looking out for your own self-interest, those interests might wind up being detrimental to others. I mean, in a Rick and Morty context, just look at what makes Crimbopulous Michael happy.
Hi, Morty. I'm Crimbopulous Michael. I'm an assassin. I just love killing.
If he's set free on society out to pursue his own happiness, it means a lot of other people are gonna have their happiness prematurely cut off. The episode makes it seem like the solution is to find a compromise between the extremes of plan for the future and live in the present moment. But both Rick and Morty miss the point. It's not about either of those things. It's not about planning for the future or living in the moment. It's about not being a selfish jerk in the immediate, not being a pure egomaniac. Morty, throughout the episode, is willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal in the long term, but the same is true for Rick in the short term. Rick, throughout the episode, is willing to do whatever it takes to get himself home, even if it means heiling Wasp Hitler.
Hell, Wasp Hitler? Look, I'm a primate. I'm having a hard time. I'll think or say whatever gets me home.
Wasp Hitler. We'll see if that's a search term that flags YouTube's algorithms. It's the same consequentialist theory. Egoism. What eventually saves both Rick and Morty isn't learning to plan for the future, but learning the importance of empathy. From Wasp Rick.
Well, here's how it works with wasps. We eat our prey alive, and when we don't, we lay our eggs in their eyeballs so that our young can feast on their brains when they hatch. When you're born that big and
Jerk.
the least you can do is have a little empathy.
It's that moment of empathy from Wasp Rick that allows our Rick to eventually return home. And it's that empathy that he learns that gets him to save and care for Morty. I mean, look at how caring and gentle he is to Morty when he's rescued from the Akira monster.
Shh, quiet, idiot, quiet. It's gonna be all right.
He has never expressed that level of care to Morty, and yet here it is on full display. Morty similarly has an eye-opening revelation in the post-credits scene when he learns that the future he foresaw this entire time was actually just a vision of him dying without any friends or family, with Jessica working as a hospice nurse who stayed with him simply because he had no other loved ones there to comfort him. Rick doesn't abandon his philosophy of living in the moment, and Morty doesn't have to abandon his philosophy of planning for the future. Instead, both of them learn to see outside of their own self-interest. Ultimately, whether you prioritize the present or plan for the future doesn't matter. If you're only focused on selfishly serving yourself, it'll lead you down a path of destruction. Sure, all that talk about living in the moment versus plan for the future may have been a point to the episode, but it wasn't the point of the episode. In the end, what really matters is about balancing your own interest with the needs of the world around you, which feels like an especially pointed message considering some members of the Rick and Morty fandom have sometimes gotten a bit of a toxic label in their behavior, bullying others, trashing McDonald's for Szechuan sauce. I mean, it is a message that's buried under a lot of layers in this episode, but you know, the Rick and Morty fandom has super high IQs, so they'll get it.
But hey, what you think of this new, more